So, welcome to a short talk on magic and scam artists. I wanted to record this because I've been hearing some stuff that makes me kind of sad for people and their circumstances in my orbits lately. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that, unfortunately, there are a bunch of people around town or online who are seriously taking advantage and just outright scamming people about stuff. And a lot of it has to do with magic and spell work and curses and all of these kinds of things. And to be honest, the topic of curses has been something that I really have been sort of hankering to find a good guest to have a really considered conversation about it. But in the meantime, I want to kind of throw out some red flags for people if you're seeing a reader and these things come up. I really want you to sort of consider stepping back and, looking for what could be a better opinion or another opinion before you decide, right? And, a lot of these people come in and you go in and, they're doing their reading and they get to the point where they've figured out what is the thing that you're just dying to have and can't live without, right? And a lot of it that has to do with love or money most of the time, right? And we all know we have our things that we need to work on and that we struggle with, right? No, I feel like nobody's going to love me. Oh, I can never quite get ahead in my business, or I keep having these problems. And, then of course, our negative mind steps in and says, and that's going to be the rest of your life, right? And these people, pick up on that because they're very skilled at it. And they pick up on it because they often use techniques known as cold reading, which is a way of asking questions or making generic statements that people really identify with and feel that more has been revealed than it has been. And then they capitalize on that. They zero in on it and they start doubling down on it. And so, one of the things to really look for is ask yourself this question. If someone says to you, hey, you've got this curse on you and you're really gonna struggle to find love, for example. Well, number one, what is going on in your love life, right? Are you making bad choices? Are you struggling to be honest? Have you been caught in a pattern? Do you have a bunch of hard stuff or trauma in your background that you're continuing to carry forward, right? What's going on there, right? And number two, who would have cursed you? Who do you know, or who in what orbits do you travel where people are actively doing magic to each other at that level? And, on the one hand, it might be easy enough to say, well, I hang out with some pagans or some witches or, whomever, and they could do these things. But I can tell you that after reading for a long time in the Caribbean communities and in the pagan and sort of witch communities, and both in Toronto and sort of online, the reality is, in my experience, very few people have the oomph to actually make these kinds of things happen, right? And, I don't mean to put anyone down or make fun of people, but, it's often the case that the louder somebody is about that stuff, the less likely that is to actually really be working or be the case. So, so there's point two, right? Are you in spaces where people are actively working magic in those kinds of ways? And if you're not, where would you have run into this? How would this have happened, right? So that's the second question, the second thing to look at. The third thing to look at is the minute that people start isolating you is the minute that you should really consider stepping away from that person. Well, you better not see any other people for the next 3 weeks or a month, or you can't work with me with anybody else, and you're never going to find anybody else who's going to make this go away. This kind of emotional blackmail and isolation is a real hallmark of manipulators and abusive behavior. And so if you're working with somebody and they're offering to help you spiritually, and yet they're telling you not to talk about their work with anybody else and not to, be around other readers or to get a second opinion, it's really a big red flag, right? And the fourth thing that I think is a real tricky thing to be mindful of is people will highlight the fact that people need something tremendously difficult or tremendously expensive as part of this, right? And the thing that I've seen over and over the years is that people will be like, oh, well, I needed this special crystal and it cost $5,000 and so on. And when I get them to show me a picture or bring it in, it's something that I could buy wholesale for $10. So, really, if someone's offering you a magical solution and they're asked to see what they're going to use, and then go and Google what it costs and see what the difference in that is, and ask them what is the amount of this difference in money for, right? Especially if they're framing the material costs as being quite high. If they're not, run away from that person real quick. Okay? And then, the other things you want to look for is if it doesn't work, what do you do then, right? Do they double down? Do they tell you that people are fighting them on it? What's the story that they tell at that point, right? And this is where it starts to get messy and sticky, right? Because in real spiritual conflicts, it is possible that both sides are kind of going back and forward. Could be the case. But at the same time, often people will encourage people to stay in that conflict and to sort of double down and push through it as a way of getting more money out of people. And in reality, it might be the best advice in the world to say, hey, you know what? In a big, long fight, nobody wins. Let's focus on getting you out of this. Let's help you get where you want to go, right? So, these are some of the things that I think are really complicated and sticky about doing spirit work, and that I hear people kind of getting caught in a lot, right? I want to really encourage everybody and anybody who's listening to this to recognize that they are likely have multiple possibilities for people who could help them, that getting a second opinion isn't a bad thing. Although, if you're working with someone on an ongoing basis, at some point you need to trust them or decide you're moving on. And that having open conversations about these things that are not geared around fear and rushing you into dropping off all your savings, but that are towards making sure that you're clear and understand what is going on, what is happening that they're going to fix, how are they going to go about it, where did it come from, and how likely is this solution to be to fix the situation. As one of my godparents used to love to say, only God is perfect. All the rest of us are just human. And that's why we should be able to say, well, I think it's like 75% likely. And anybody who tells you that everything they do is 100% accurate or 100% effective, for me, that's a deal breaker right there. So I don't want anybody to be dissuaded from engaging in spirit work or even hiring people to do spirit work for them. I think it's tremendously valuable. And I think that it can really accomplish a lot of things. And maybe I'll share some of that in a future post. But I've been hearing a lot of people getting ripped off for quite sizable chunks of money. And it's not that I think that paying people well for their work doesn't make sense, because I think it really does. But I think that the challenges, the behaviors and the fear-mongering and the manipulations that are involved that are really just con men ripping people off of their money. So if you want to know more about cold reading, please check the link I have in the show notes to a wonderful piece that Mary Greer wrote a few years back. And if you ever need a second opinion on this kind of stuff, with no obligation for anything from me, I'm always happy to be a reality check for this kind of stuff. Just drop me a line or book an appointment. If you enjoyed this short talk, You can find a lot more of these kinds of things and new ones every month on the Patreon. So jump on over to Patreon and support the podcast and my efforts, and you will get bonuses of art as well as these short talks on a variety of topics for you to enjoy.